and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And we start off with some good news for a change. In Chicago, an African-American lesbian was the top vote getter in the first round for the Chicago mayoral race.
14 candidates, and she got the most votes. There will be a runoff. Not so good news. The Methodist Church voted against affirming gay love and gay clergy, and may break up as a result.
Another Catholic Cardinal, the former #2 man in the Vatican, is convicted of child abuse.
And the Trump administration, just another day in the Trump administration, making a big move to deny women access to reproductive freedom.
On the other hand, the federal courts rebuked the U.S. State Department on 2 LGBT issues.
And a lesbian in Kansas rebuked her father, who's a Republican representative, and that made him drop his support for anti-LGBT legislation.
We're going to tell you about trans pioneer and soul singer Jackie Shane, who has died at the age of 78.
And of course, we'll review the LGBT angles on the Oscars. Lots of big wins for people playing LGBT characters.
And the movie about bad boy photographer Robert Mapplethorpe is being played by Matt Smith, and I'll have a review.
But really, the big headline is in Chicago, they held a mayoral primary. 14 candidates, including Bill Daley, who is the former, Commerce Secretary?
Correct.
Brother of Richie Daley, who'd been mayor of Chicago for so many years.
Son of the mayor.
He came in third. And the top 2 vote getters were both African-American women. Chicago will have an African-American female mayor.
For the first time.
Yes, absolutely for the first time. And the #1 vote getter by a small margin is Lori Lightfoot, who is an out lesbian with a wife and a daughter. We're working to get a picture of all of them up there.
I mean, most recently, she was president of the Chicago Police Board from 2015 to 18. She's a lawyer, former prosecutor. The runoff is going to be with Toni Preckwinkle on April 2nd. She's the Cook County Board president, also African-American, as you said. This is Lightfoot's first run for public office.
Well, the Victory Fund, which supports LGBT candidates, has been touting her all along. I get their emails, I'm on their list, and they've been saying, Lori Lightfoot is going to be the mayor of Chicago. And I'm just getting these and thinking, yeah, right, Well. And here she is, the top vote getter in the primary. So there is some controversy about her because she's made a lot of promises, as one does, about cleaning up Chicago. There she is. She's on the right there, Lori Lightfoot. In the center is her daughter, and on the left, the much taller Amy Eshelman, who is her wife and co-mother of their daughter. And little Lori Lightfoot, as she calls herself, is primed to maybe be the next mayor of Chicago.
Right. So very exciting. That's on April 2nd, the runoff in Chicago. We should say, we had Danny O'Donnell, who was running for public advocate on this show a couple of weeks ago. He finished down the list.
Middle of the pack.
The winner, it was a big pack. The winner was Jumaane Williams by a long shot.
Well, nice to have a man of color be elected in this city to a citywide office.
It's about time.
Yes. Danny ran an excellent race, but there were 17 candidates.
Yes.
All right, so that's, I'm just gobsmacked by Lori Lightfoot.
And
we'll see how she does.
Horrified about what's going on in the United Methodist Church. Perhaps we shouldn't be too surprised.
Yeah.
Now, this is the second largest Protestant denomination in this country, but it's a worldwide church, and it's a hierarchical church. They have bishops, and there's not complete local control. So we've been trying to move along towards acceptance of gay clergy, acceptance of gay marriage, at least in the regional level, which they were shooting for.
Well, their rules state that the practice of homosexuality, as opposed to actually being homosexual.
Well, yes.
Practice is always an amusing word.
Practice.
Yeah. The practice of homosexuality, they say, is incompatible with Christianity.
That's what most major religions say, unless they're not Christian.
Well, it's not unanimous.
Well, Catholics, Muslims,
and
Orthodox
my Congregationalists and the Unitarians
Yes.
and the Episcopalians now are coming along, and Reform Judaism, even Conservative Judaism.
Absolutely. But
so anyway,
that's not the majority.
Well, anyway, so that's the Methodist line. Nonetheless, there has been some local option. There are some out LGBT clergy in Methodist churches, and maybe even an illegal marriage or two performed. But they have been debating this for many years, and they hold this general conference, every 10 years or so?
I don't know.
So they had various proposals. One was the traditional proposal, which would not only keep their prohibitions, but strengthen them. And
encourage people who disagree with their anti-LGBT policies to leave. That was part of the proposal.
The other proposal was called the One Church proposal, although really it was about local option and tolerating everybody doing their own thing.
So you got a combination of conservatives in the United States who are a minority.
Yep.
And then you have the worldwide church, especially in Africa, which is extremely conservative. I mean,
they make up about 40% of the entire church.
One of the African bishops said, if you ease these bans, the church in Africa will cease to exist if this is what you make us embrace.
Well, that was the fight in the Anglican Church too.
So anyway, the vote on to ease the bans failed by a vote of 449 to 374. So it's quite divided, and it was about letting the regional churches do their own thing. So what everybody seems that it is hurtling towards is a schism where they would break up and they would have two different, because don't forget, this is the United Methodist Church, which brought together certain sections before. So now they break up and they have, because the people who run the seminaries and the colleges and the Methodist schools, they say, we're writing off the next generation if you can't get it together and accept gay people.
Well, it's kind of shocking, even knowing that such a large block of votes come from out of the United States and conservative areas around the world. It is shocking in this day and age to think that you would have a vote like this that would say so overtly and explicitly that...
the Catholic Church does the same thing. I mean, come on.
Well, they don't take votes.
That's right. There's no voting in the Catholic Church.
No.
The delegates approved a plan to let individual churches leave if they want to and take their church property, which is a big deal because when the conservatives wanted to leave in the Episcopal Church, they couldn't take their property with them.
That's true. That is true. So anyway, they can't stay and have local option, but they can leave, and I'm sure many will.
The other big religious news this week came from Australia.
Yeah.
We finally learned that Cardinal George Pell, who was the former number 2 person in the Vatican, was convicted a couple of months ago of molesting 13-year-old boys in 1996. Now, he's a leading homophobe. Right?
Terrible. He preaches all the time about how horrible homosexuality is.
So he forced oral sex on 2 boys, made them disrobe and masturbated himself. One of the boys died of a drug overdose.
It's a family program.
One of the boys died of a drug overdose in 2014 at the age of 30. But his lawyer said this was plain, I'm quoting, it was plain vanilla sexual penetration case where the child is not actively participating. That's what the lawyer said.
Oh my God.
So it's so horrifying.
Why didn't he just use a blow-up doll?
It's just so hard. And then, wait a minute, he found these two kids who were hiding in the sacristy for some reason, drinking altar wine, and then he molested them. And then he saw one of them a couple of days later and grabbed him by the genitals.
And the reason
This is Cardinal Pell.
The reason it took us a couple of months to find out that he'd been convicted of these crimes is because they were going to try him for other crimes, and they didn't want to prejudice the jury or the court or whatever, so they said you can't reveal these convictions right away. But then they decided to drop that other case, and so now we can learn that Cardinal Pell has been convicted on these other
And then
charges.
there was the spectacle in Rome of the Pope calling, they have the big thing on, now we're really going to take sexual abuse seriously. They never do. And he called the priests who sexually abused children tools of Satan. No, they're your employees. That's who they are.
He turned it into this whole elaborate metaphor that was just completely distancing from reality.
They refused to set a global standard. I mean, the Bishop of Arabia said he'd be reluctant to expose an abuser even if guilty because they'd face the death penalty. The Bishop of El Salvador called it an Anglo-Saxon phenomenon.
I have to say I'm surprised there's a Bishop of Arabia.
The Bishop of Rio said, it probably exists. I mean, this is the way these people don't want to know.
Well, this is their excuse for not going farther, faster, and just saying turn them all into the cops. They say, culturally, some places are just not ready to accept that this happens, or they have these other problems, like someone might be killed.
But so there were no fundamental reforms on abuse, but there's also never any talk, of course, of fundamental reform of let's have women clergy and priests and bishops and a pope who would solve these problems.
Well, there was a lot of talk about it in the
gay
press.
People, openly gay people.
In the press.
Well.
Which I think that's a step forward because, a lot of these religions are, you should excuse the phrase, sacrosanct to outsiders who are afraid to criticize or suggest other methods. So I'm encouraged by the fact that it's being discussed more openly.
We've always been fairly fearless about it here on Gay USA.
Well, I remain completely mystified at how anyone can be part of an organization that purports to have the complete truth about everything when the neighboring organization also claims to have the complete truth about everything in opposition, and yet they are both religions.
I know. And as I always say to my Catholic friends, take control of your church or you're responsible for this.
I think that is the farthest thing from their minds.
No, okay.
Because that's completely antithetical to the entire structure.
Well, but you see it, at least in other churches, there is some democracy and you can bring motions and you can change things.
Yes, and how often do Catholics join other non-hierarchical religions?
Oh, I see. Well...
They want that hierarchy.
I became a dirty atheist, and I remain one today.
Yeah.
Okay, so we go to the Trump administration.
Sure, why not?
I mean, the horror there this week, of course, and it bears saying, is they're really trying to turn the Handmaid's Tale into a reality with this gag rule.
Yeah.
Basically saying that if you make an abortion referral, you can't get any federal funding. This is, they're trying to defund Planned Parenthood, of course. And
these are Title X funds, and the system in the past has been they won't fund anyone that does abortions,
right.
But you can segregate the funds so that Planned Parenthood can offer abortions, but not in the part of the organization that takes federal funds. But now, since the organization refers for abortion, this cuts them off.
This all comes out of the Department of Health and Human Services, which is essentially run by an evangelical cabal at this point.
I thought you were going to call it an oxymoron.
Well, it's that too. But there's this guy named Matthew Bowman there who was active in something called Operation Save America, a big anti-LGBT group. Mm-hmm. And his mission is getting all these anti-abortion things into every possible regulation that they can.
I was also stunned to see this week a piece in the New York Times about sex education and the proposal in Colorado to mandate good, appropriate, comprehensive sex education, including discussions of sexual orientation and accurate talk about birth control or whatever. And that there are only, that 39 states emphasize abstinence-only education. Only 13, no, that wouldn't be the right number. But it's really very rare to have comprehensive sex education in this country. And it's become, 37 require abstinence. 13 require sex education to be medically accurate. 13. In 7 states, laws prohibit educators from portraying same-sex relations positively. 7 states forbid it.
Well.
And that's all this kind of stuff that the Trump administration is into.
Go to the internets and you will find out what's going on. Watch the Gay USA show. They can't stop you.
Use the Google machine, as they say.
Yeah, but at least the Colorado House made some progress on that this week.
Yes, by passing that bill, and now it goes to the Senate. All right, other Trump administration stuff.
Well, I mean, we shouldn't overlook the fact that another woman, the 22nd woman, is accused of sexual harassment or abuse, and this was a campaign worker, Alva Johnson, who alleges that he forcibly kissed her.
Yes. I saw her this week on MSNBC. She was enormously credible and moving. She got quite choked up, and her story was very believable.
African-American woman. She's also suing over the fact that women were paid less on the campaign than men.
And by race also.
Yes.
So the State Department got a couple of slapbacks this week from the courts. First of all, they have been told that they must provide a non-binary passport to an intersex person, Dana Zim, who has been fighting this for years.
A U.S. Navy veteran.
The State Department had asked for a stay on this order, and the court rejected it and said, nope, hand over that passport.
Yeah, the court said Dana has missed travel opportunities for 4 years while you're stalling on this, and told them to update your software. It's not that difficult. What, we can't do it, can't do it.
Yeah. And then a federal judge in California has ruled that a same-sex couple, men, who were married in Canada, I think, an Israeli man married to an American man, and they donated sperm for twin sons to be born.
So one is the biological son of one, one's the biological son of the other.
And the United States, even though they are married and one is an American citizen, would only recognize the child of the American husband.
And these kids were born seconds apart to the same surrogate.
Yes. And they are both the sons of both parents.
Right.
But the U.S. would not recognize them. Aren't they a cute family? There they are.
And, you know, they demanded DNA tests of the kids.
So that they could separate them.
Which is a common American policy these days at the border.
Yep.
But they prevailed in the federal court, and they're going to get citizenship. It's for both for the other kid in this case.
Yeah, that's good news. Well, Virginia is expanding surrogacy rules for unmarried people, and New York State is about to vote on allowing surrogacy. One of the great scandals here is that New York State has forbidden surrogacy. I think that's an attempt to prevent women from being exploited as surrogate mothers. But people have had to travel out of state for years to have their children born. Andy Cohen had a surrogate in California carry his son. Congratulations, Andy Cohen, on the birth of your son, Benjamin Allen Cohen. But now, if we pass this law in New York, people will not have to go all the way across the country.
Yeah, we tell you about all the terrible the Trump judicial nominees, and he is stacking the court with right-wingers. And this is another right-winger, basically. Her name is Naomi Rao. She is from the Federalist Society. But conservatives are worried that she's a closet abortion rights supporter and may be a rival to Judge Amy Coney Barrett, the Catholic anti-abortion person. And
rabidly anti.
Yeah, but this woman also, Rao, also apparently said at the time that she was pleased with the same-sex marriage ruling of the court. And she's up for Brett Kavanaugh's seat on the U.S. Court of Appeals, but she may be stopped by the Republicans.
Yep, absolutely. I was happy to see that 5 trans members of the military testified this week before the House Armed Services Committee.
Yes.
This is the Democrats in charge of the House being able to hold hearings, whether it's Michael Cohen or trans military members. This is the Democrats being able to set the agenda, and that is a revolution.
Were they treated with respect by the Republicans?
I don't know, because it happened today, and I don't know
we haven't
yet.
seen it yet. All right.
As we're taping.
Now, we told you last week about how Richard Grenell, our out-gay ambassador to Germany, says, he's going to do a worldwide campaign to decriminalize homosexuality. And he says he has support at home from Republicans and religious conservatives. So they said, oh, who? And he wouldn't say. On Trump was it?
Because there aren't any.
They asked Trump about it, and he says, I don't know anything about it. I don't know Michael Cohen.
Well, it turns out that this is all
Who's he?
Richard Grenell acting on his own. He didn't talk to anyone in Washington about it. He just decided he was going to do this, and he's doing it. And it's all, he's really just kissing up to Trump because it's a way to go after Iran.
Right.
And he's getting nowhere with it because we don't buy it. Trump doesn't know about it.
Didn't Jared call him and saying, you want to screw up things for me in Saudi Arabia? I've got deals there. I need their money.
I think Jared's whole Mideast peace plan revolves around buying people off.
Right.
Yeah.
And by the way, the new pick for the United Nations, this climate change denier, Kelly Knight Craft, she's our ambassador to Canada.
Painful.
And of course, Trump also set up a panel on climate change deniers. I mean, folks, this is really serious. This is the end of the world we're talking about here. You didn't hear it here first.
All right. Well, let's hear the good news from Kansas. So Kansas has this representative, Ron Hyland, and he's an extreme right-winger. And Andy told you last week about how they had this bill that tried to define homosexuality as a secular religion so they could get the state to stop financing anything gay.
And to call same-sex marriage parody marriage.
Yeah.
That's the phrase they use.
So Ron Hyland was one of the people behind this, but Ron Hyland has a daughter who thinks all that is whack.
Her name is Crystal Hyland, and she's out lesbian, and she said, your God did not elect you. Anyway, she said, living, breathing human beings did. Further isolating the marginalized is far from your duty. Shame on you, she said publicly. She writes publicly to her father. And her father repented and said, here's what he said. The bill is against our Lord's command to love our neighbors.
Could he please spread that around to the rest of the Republican Party?
He had to work God in there, and he did.
Hey, whatever it takes. I'll take it in that circumstance.
Okay.
So I don't know that it killed the bill or anything.
Well, we'll find out. Well, the 4 anti-transgender bills in South Dakota have once again, for the 3rd year, I think, in a row, gone down to defeat. We worry about them, but they didn't pass.
That's great. But in North Dakota, the House there defeated a sexual orientation non-discrimination bill for just employment and housing. So our side is saying, well, it didn't include gender identity, it didn't include public accommodation, so we weren't that hot on it either.
All right. Are we going to update people on Jussie Smollett?
We are, but I have a few other political stories first.
Right, in
Utah, the legislature is going to consider a ban on conversion therapy. And guess what? The Mormons are not going to oppose that. Probably because it only deals with medical practitioners, not religious
Well, in
people.
all cases, it's supposed to just cover reimbursement, and we're not going to cover it if you do it. I mean, religious people are still going to counselors and everywhere where they ban conversion therapy to say, you're not supposed to be gay, don't do it.
Yeah.
But they're not supposed to do it as practitioners who are going to get reimbursed. All right, the big decision out of the Missouri Supreme Court, they affirmed the protection of gay and trans rights under laws banning sex discrimination.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That's an ACLU case. Thank you.
And in Fairbanks, Alaska, an old colleague of mine, Kathy Otterston, she was part of the St. Patrick's Six. It was Charles King, Kathy, me, Sharon, Michael, and Rod.
Okay.
And Kathy was just a young, crazy trans kid at the time, 30 years ago when we got arrested in St. Patrick's Cathedral. Well, this fall, she was elected to the City Council of Fairbanks, Alaska, out trans woman, and she has been fighting the good fight there. And this week, the City Council passed a non-discrimination law.
4-2.
Yep. And both sexual orientation and gender identity. And Fairbanks, this is a big win. So, hi, Kathy, and congratulations.
Congratulations. And congratulations to the inmates in San Bernardino, California. The county is going to have to pay $1 million to LGBTQI inmates who were held for 23 hours a day in the alternative lifestyle tank at the West Valley Detention Center. A federal judge ruled in this case. Again, it was the ACLU. These inmates were denied access to job training, education, drug rehabilitation, religious and community reentry programs. So there were 600 inmates kept in this tank over the years from 2012 to 2018. 15 sued. They won $1 million.
This is a common story of segregating prisoners and keeping them away from all the job training.
We don't know what to do with you. What are you?
Yeah.
What are you? What are you?
We don't want you out in the general population. We don't want to touch you. We don't, you're evil and icky, so we're not going to do this. And thank you to the major airlines of the United States, American, United, Delta, Southwest, JetBlue. They will let passengers register for flights as non-binary. That has to match their government ID, but they are now acknowledging that more and more people are allowed to have government IDs that say
I will say I go
non-binary.
into a lot of doctors' offices, and they still haven't updated their forms to reflect any of this.
And they're not going to until they run out of forms and have to print new ones, and then maybe they will.
And back to Virginia for a second, their legislation to curb conversion therapy has stalled, so the state's professional health boards are pursuing regulations to ban it, and that could happen within the year.
And bad news, we thought that Gloucester County, where Gavin Grimm went to school, was going to update its regulations for trans students, but they turned it down. They said, no, we are going to continue to restrict bathroom use to just your birth gender. And that's a big loss. That's sad.
But progress in the District of Columbia with the City Council is calling on the D.C. Superior Court to amend its non-discrimination policy to include sexual orientation and gender identity in the jury selection process.
All right, well, let's do update Jussie Smollett.
Okay.
Jussie Smollett.
Well, it's been big news. He's been portrayed as a hoaxer, and they have indicted him, and he's been in court. That's him coming out of court there on the right. He was kicked off.
I suspect this is more complex.
He was kicked off Empire. He apparently he may have gotten the idea for this from a Lee Daniels post online on January 10th about a cousin who was assaulted because he was gay, and Daniels had made a presentation to the Empire cast about it, which didn't leave a dry eye in the House. Now, Smollett has been charged with felony disorderly conduct. He told the cops he has an untreated drug problem.
And he's also talked about a sort of fragile mental state, and I'm unhappy about the fact that when this was first reported as having happened, the assault, everybody goes, oh, you know, he's assaulted, blah, blah, blah. And then it's called a hoax and everybody goes, oh, he's a monster and evil. And I wish people would just wait for a little more nuance and more facts and find out what's really going on. Meanwhile, what it did do, though, is prompt a state rep in Florida to come out about his own bashing in college, I think, which he had never talked about because he wanted to make sure that people understood that these attacks are real.
Except in Michigan, shades of Jussie Smollett.
Maybe.
A 2017 arson fire at the home of trans activist Nikki Jolie, Joly, of Jackson. It killed 5 of pets. Once thought to be a hate crime, now believed to have been set by Jolie himself.
But again, still some unknown details of that.
Okay.
So I just want people to take a minute.
A very sad story that I read about a personality at KTLA, Chris Burrows.
Oh, God, yes.
He died of a meth overdose at the age of 43 that he used while hooking up on Grindr with men. He's survived by a wife and daughter, obviously have been living on the down low or double life or just...
We don't know. We don't know what the wife knew. But, let's not make assumptions.
But just in terms of warning about practices, he had inserted 2 rocks of crystal meth into his rectum. There was no crime here. The death was ruled accidental, but don't fool around with that.
Please. In Minnesota, a new lawsuit has been filed against the Anoka-Hennepin Schools District. They made a trans boy use the female, or use a non-designated changing room. He'd been on the swim team. He'd been using the boys' locker room for a long time. And then suddenly they decide, no, he can't do that anymore. And this is not the first time that Anoka-Hennepin has been accused of being discriminatory against trans students. And they were under a 5-year court order to change their act. And then the court order expired and boom, they go after this kid. I don't know if that's related, but you'd think they'd have learned their lesson by then, but no.
In Tennessee, a family-owned bake shop in Dixon County, Susie's Sweets, has refused a wedding cake to a gay couple due to spiritual conviction, which comes down basically to their embrace of the God hates fags philosophy, though they try to say it more nicely. And then in Denver, you had a videographer who wouldn't shoot a gay wedding. This is in Denver, and he's upset that he's being portrayed as anti-gay, which is a little...
yeah, they all say they love us. They just, God won't let them serve us.
Denver could be actionable, but, you know...
Well, Denver has non-discrimination orders. Excuse me, I'm going to...
Unlike Susie's Sweets in Tennessee.
Well, what do you think of this whole idea that, you know, let them discriminate, but they have to put a sign in the window saying no gays, whatever?
I mean, look, some of these are close calls because we do believe in First Amendment rights, and the question is whether you would perform a service for one that you wouldn't perform a service for another. Like printers are not required to print books that they don't want to print if they don't like the content of the books. I mean, if they don't want to print pornography, for instance, they don't have to print pornography. But again, if you sell wedding cakes to people of the opposite sex, you should have to sell wedding cakes to people of the same sex, and these get into tough areas.
Well, I understand that that's the law, but what I'm asking is, what do you think about the proposal that maybe that shouldn't be the law and people should have the right to discriminate, but they have to be more public about it?
Well, it's going to create a lot of ugliness. First of all, I think
a terrible ugliness.
That there are very few vendors who assert themselves this way. I mean, it happened in Mississippi when they were given the right to do it. They put up signs saying, we welcome everybody. And when the New York Times went around and talked to everybody, they all said, no, we want their money. We're not going to discriminate against anyone. It's a very small minority, and that's what we're hearing about.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the libertarian view is If somebody doesn't want to let black people into their restaurant and you don't like that, don't go to their restaurant. You could even protest outside their restaurant, but they have the right to do what they want with their business. That is the libertarian view.
Yes.
Oh, I mean, are we going to? I mean, I've worked for civil rights laws all my life, which protect people in public accommodations. We think it makes for a better society. I know it rubs people the wrong way to have to treat people decently, but that's the kind of society that I would rather live in.
Yes, and I'd like that to happen in Houston, where Houston County will not pay for medical treatment for gender dysphoria to a sergeant in their sheriff's office. And
they're going, and the sergeant is
there she is.
The
Anna
sergeant
Lang.
is going to the EEOC to try to win the right to get this covered.
The city could buy insurance coverage for this, and they're refusing to. They're saying, no, we're not going to spend any money to buy insurance coverage for these procedures. And that's a real shame. We want to congratulate the new co-dean of the Rutgers University Camden Law School. There she is, Kimberly. I've got to put my glasses
I have it as
on.
Mutcherson.
Yes, that's it. Thank you.
A bioethics and health law school.
First lesbian, first female, first black co-dean of the law school. She's checking all the boxes, and congratulations to her.
And there's been a breakthrough at the Alliance Francaise. They're now hosting Drag Queen Story Hour for 3 to 8-year-olds. Kids will hear stories, sing songs, and play in a glamorous setting that broadens their horizons. It's hosted by Harmonica Sunbeam on March the 2nd at the Haskell Library on East 60th Street. But this is a phenomenon across the country.
It is, and it's doing
Drag Queen Story Hour.
It's doing us a lot of good. I applaud them.
It makes the heads explode of
But
the
as long
right
as
wing.
we're talking about something like that, let's go to California, where a gentleman applied to the Department of Motor Vehicles for a specialty license plate, as people do. And this one said Leather Daddy.
Well, it says LTHRDDY, which you could, if you fill in the spaces, is Leather Daddy.
Yes. But the DMV turned him down. And I want you to put up his picture because he's very cute. And I don't know how anybody could turn him down for anything.
The DMV said that he is guilty of lust and depravity. That's what they said. Now,
yes, lust and depravity.
Gay Senator Scott Wiener says that the DMV is homophobic.
You think? Yeah. All right. So there's a new coalition to decriminalize sex work, decarcerate people, meaning get them out of prison, and destigmatize. This is called the
Decrim
New York Coalition.
And it's sponsored by our state senator, Brad Hoylman, our assembly member, Dick Gottfried, but also Julia Salazar, Jessica Ramos, and 100 people showed up for this press conference.
Yeah.
And, the anti-sex trafficking laws have fallen hardest on trans sex workers who have now lost safe forums in order to do their work, and it subjects them to violence. The bill would repeal the law passed by our state senator Fred Ornstein back in the 80s that forbids loitering for the purpose of engaging in prostitution. And what this meant was, if you were a person that the police didn't like and you stopped to light a cigarette, you were getting arrested for loitering. And they still do it to trans women who walk along the street minding their own business going to and from work. They charge them with prostitution. You're street walking, you're loitering. Oh, it's just awful. And it's gone too far.
There is a distinction to be made between people who are sex trafficked and forced into this and held against their will and all of that versus people who are trying to make a living.
But as I pointed out, when they arrest you for prostitution now, they want to get a higher charge of you're somehow involved in trafficking. So if you're standing with someone else, one other person who you're maybe working with or something like that, they call that trafficking.
Wow.
And believe me, the penalty you're going to face is is going to be, 10 times what it would be for just, sex work. So we've got to calm down about this. Yes, we have to eliminate real trafficking and sex slavery and all that.
And we have to go after people like this Pastor Albert Weathers, who's on trial in Detroit for the murder in December of a trans woman who was a sex worker, Kelly Stuff, and a very brave other trans sex worker, Kyra Butts, testified against him, testified that she had seen him in the area repeatedly, had sex with him, had arguments with him over pain, and the assumption is that he got angry at Kelly and killed her.
Stop stigmatizing. There was a study out of North Carolina this week. You think it gets better? Well, it found that the youth suicide rate has more than doubled since 2010. 16% contemplated and 8% attempted suicide, but the rate is double for African American students and 43% for LGBT youth.
We want to remember some people we lost in the last week or so.
We do.
Jackie Shane. Man, am I sorry I didn't know about her earlier.
Well, she disappeared for many years.
Well, she went to take care of her mother.
She did.
She was an R&B soul singer and very successful and popular back in the 70s.
In the 60s.
Yeah.
She packed nightclubs in Toronto, but she stepped
Born
out
in Tennessee.
She stepped out of the spotlight. Oh, she moved to Canada because of all the racism.
Exactly. And because of homophobic bullying or transphobic, because she was trans and she started portraying herself that way at a very young age. And she got bullied a lot. So she went to Toronto and she was very popular there, but then it fell off a little and she moved to California to take care of her mother and then eventually moved back to Tennessee. Well, this last year, a record company that reissues classic old albums finally got in touch with her, got permission to issue one of hers, and it was nominated for a Grammy.
It was.
For Historical Album of the Year.
Because she reemerged in her 70s. It's never too late. She, when she grew up in the South, it was segregated. She apparently identified as a girl at the age of 13, but in the 60s was referred to as a man and told her peers that she was gay. And she said, I was just being me. I never tried to explain myself to anyone. But here's the story. And when she was bullied as a child, she picked up a jump rope and whipped the bully. And when the teacher intervened, she hit the teacher too. And I've heard about
our kind of girl. All right. We also mourn the loss of Dick Summers at age 92. Good for you, Dick. He was the oldest member of the Los Angeles Gay Men's Chorus. And also a member of the Mattachine Society, worked on The Advocate, and helped found the Metropolitan Community Church.
Yes, he was a deacon there, and that's even before Stonewall. So a lot of his and he once was stripped of his security clearances by our government, but he got the ACLU to restore it. As his heart failed, 40 chorus members came into the hospital and sang to him, and it was very moving. And he was singing, sitting on a stool when he had Parkinson's disease with the chorus, so a fantastic character, Dick Summers.
Well, also a character, a friend of mine from ACT UP, John Iverson, who died at the age of 69 of a massive stroke in San Francisco, in Berkeley. He was a great, fierce activist. He worked with ACT UP East Bay in Berkeley. He was big on needle exchange. But he was also, part or maybe more Chippewa. And he was very active with the American Indian movement, was at Wounded Knee, worked till the end of his life for Leonard Peltier, and was honored by AIM. He was a very cranky guy, but very, very wonderful. And
we like cranky people.
Yeah, he died a couple of months ago.
Why wouldn't you be cranky given what's going on in the world today?
There's going to be a memorial for him on May 5th. At the Berkeley Senior Center at noon. So John Iverson.
All right.
And I was sorry to hear that Nancy Davis, partner of Lily Vincennes, died.
Oh, really?
Lily is in nursing home.
Lily Vincennes was a Stonewall activist.
Yeah.
It goes back all the way, and before Stonewall, fantastic activist.
We have some of her video in our opening sequence, and I corresponded with her to get permission to use that.
Wow.
She was terrific, and she has now lost her partner, Nancy Davis, which is a shame.
Very sorry to hear.
Finally, Peter Awn, who was a beloved dean at Columbia University, 75, hit by a car uptown on Claremont Avenue, and he's greatly missed there at Columbia.
Right. International news?
Well, I got one more here.
Go ahead.
Semi-international, segue to international.
Okay.
The No Border Wall protest drag show.
Oh, yes.
These trans women or drag artists were very moved by the death of the woman who came here from El Salvador, was deported by the U.S., trans woman, went back to El Salvador and was killed. So they staged a protest at the border wall in Brownsville, Texas on her behalf.
Raising money for transgender folks who are trying to seek asylum.
All right. Now we can hop quickly through international news.
Apparently everybody is horrified that the Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel has embraced the racist Kahanist Otzma Yehudit party. Even AIPAC in America is criticizing this. This party advocates violent racism and homophobia and everything, and in order to hold on power, he's embracing them. It's
a common story around the world. People do business with these right-wing parties in order to gain power. It's happened in England, it's happened in Australia, it's happened everywhere.
Well, they do it in the United Kingdom, but
they do it here.
Yes,
they line up with the right-wing evangelicals.
We're living under fascist rule. But in the United Kingdom, they have, despite having a conservative government, they have updated their relationship and sex education curricula to include LGBTQ people and topics.
And a committee of the Foreign Affairs Committee of Parliament put out a report saying that the UK should force all its territories to legalize same-sex marriage. It's not expected to go anywhere.
But we told you about the fact that the BBC got their first LGBTQ correspondent, Ben Hunty, and he says he has never received so much abuse in his life after taking this position, both racist, he's black, and homophobic.
Yeah, and I saw that first report, and it was perfectly mild, just a person on the street interviews, and he sounded a little too scared to me. Of, I don't know if I could do this anymore. They're coming after me.
Well,
I mean, come on, Ben.
Well, look at that guy who was working for the Catholic Church doing gay ministry, and he got so much abuse, and they were threatening his family that he quit. You know?
All right. Well, in Cuba, they finally passed a new constitution, and they did take same-sex marriage legalization out of it. But I see that what they do have is a non-discrimination clause about sexual orientation and gender identity.
But not in marriage.
Well, they say all people have a right to form a family.
Well, but that's what happened in South Africa. They banned discrimination based on sexual orientation, and then the court said, well, then you got to let people get married.
And they also said marriage is a social and legal institution. They took out the clause that said marriage was man-woman only. So who knows?
The Tunisian government has moved to shutter the LGBT group there. The brave people who do those things in Tunisia.
Yeah, the government is appealing a 2016 court ruling that legalized the gay group. 3 years later, they say, you know what, we think that's not a good idea. We're appealing that. In Taiwan, people are now getting very upset about the proposal for the civil partnerships. The right wing thinks it's going too far. The left wing thinks it's not going far enough, so they're having protests in the streets, and it's a mess.
They have even introduced a bill in Poland to ban conversion therapy. It's from the Liberal Party. They're not in power, but at least it's on the table.
And in Pakistan, the government has put together a new public school for trans girls.
This is the second one that they put together. It's government funded in Punjab, and the first one opened in Lahore in 2018. Punjab's school education department ordered all schools to treat trans students equally at private and public schools. The U.S. Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, you remember, ordered all schools to ignore the Obama-era guidance to do the same.
Yes, and they want to give these kids in Pakistan job training and education, so maybe they won't all end up as sex workers getting arrested by the cops.
Yes.
In Kenya, the High Court has delayed its decision on the sodomy law case. They were expected to decide by now, but they postponed the decision till May. Do they think it's going to be safe by then to strike down the sodomy law? In Spain, there's a new far-right party called the Vox Party. They got one seat in the legislature, and what did they use it for? To block a non-discrimination for gay people in sports
with one
proposal. One seat, they were able to block it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Terrible.
In Senegal, they're having an election season there, and they're stirring up anti-gay views as, scapegoating.
How do you think they're going to get elected?
There was a gay man beaten to death in a suburb of Dakar in the midst of this. That's what happens when you stir that up. In Serbia, we have a lesbian prime minister, Ana Brnabić.
Conservative.
But her partner has given birth to a baby boy.
Well,
Congratulations to them. We note, sadly, the death of Hilda Zadek at 101, according to our Gay USA opera correspondent, Donald Collins.
She was a mainstay of the Vienna State Opera, and in 1934, when Hitler came to power, she heard her schoolmates say, "It reeks of Jews." And at 16, she knocked that girl's front teeth out. She was expelled, and she fled to Palestine.
Bye, Hilda. All right, in Ireland, we're transitioning now to AIDS news with a little international AIDS news. HIV infections up in Ireland as opposed to most of the rest of Europe.
Mostly sexual transmission between men, and they've got a rate of 10.2 per 100,000. The European average is 6.2 per 100,000. Latvia and Estonia have much higher rates. A lot of Irish infections among new immigrants.
A lot of heterosexual transmission.
And
IVD
they've been very slow to introduce generic PrEP over there, and they don't have great sex education.
And the lovely president of the Philippines, President Duterte, says don't use condoms. They're unsatisfying.
Oh my God.
The new HIV infection rate in the Philippines is up 3,000%.
And they had the big hearing in the Senate, the U.S. Senate, on big pharma. And I watched a lot of it. I don't see it going anywhere. I also want to mourn the loss of the disability rights advocate Carrie Ann Lucas, mother of 4 adopted disabled kids. She died at the age of 47 because United Healthcare wouldn't pay for a $2,000 drug that she needed to survive. And she spiraled down and she died.
All right, pause and then move on to entertainment news.
Right.
What was the most entertaining thing at the Oscars? You get one guess.
Billy Porter in his hoop skirt.
Yes, by Christian Siriano, formerly of Project Runway.
Billy, who was so critical of Kevin Hart.
Look, I love Billy. I love him on Pose. I love him in this dress. I love what he said about Kevin Hart. He can do no wrong, and everybody loved that dress.
And let's look at the acting winners, because, folks, the best actress, supporting actor were for gay and bisexual roles, and the supporting actress was from a role based on a book by out gay James Baldwin.
Rami Malek on the left starred as out gay Freddie Mercury
And
in
he
Bohemian Rhapsody.
acknowledged Freddie being gay. He didn't talk about his AIDS, but Olivia Colman, Anne's favorite, and
Yes.
and my favorite in the movie The Favorite.
Yeah.
A surprising win over
Yep.
over.
Although she'd won at the Golden Globe, she'd won at BAFTA.
Yes.
I feel sorry for Glenn Close, but I love that Olivia Colman won.
It was fantastic.
And that was there is no more lesbian movie this year than The Favorite.
And Olivia said to her kids, "Take a good look at this. It's not going to happen again."
And
think it might, though.
Back up there.
Wait a minute,
Can you put that picture
she's
back
going to
up?
be playing Queen Elizabeth in the third,
In
fourth
The
season of The Crown.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, so then we have Regina King, who was in If Beale Street Could Talk and spoke very movingly about James Baldwin, the gay author. And Mahershala Ali has won for his second gay role.
He wasn't gay. He was in a gay movie,
Moonlight.
but he was in Moonlight. He didn't have a gay role.
My favorite movie of all time, almost.
And he paid tribute to Don Shirley, the gay man that he played in Green Book.
Yeah, and Green Book, of course, won Best Picture. I haven't seen it, so I have no opinion, but of course it has the gay character. Yeah. Marguerite did not win for Best Live Action Short. That was the lesbian short that was supposed to win.
Supposed to win.
Well, it was favored. I looked
I
at
know.
Gold Derby.
I did too. I went, Tom, I'm not going to even say your last name today because we know I went with your predictions and I didn't do too well, but you should always go to goldderby.com to figure out what's going on.
And then, of course, the show is opened by the very gay Adam Lambert performing with Queen.
Yes.
And the winners for animated short, Bow. I think one of those women thanked her partner, Dina.
Have you seen the movie? You can watch it on your phone, or you can watch it. You can watch it on your
If I had a phone.
BAO. Well, you can look it on your computer, and you can watch this darling little film about a dumpling.
Yes. Now back to the Independent Spirit Awards, which were the night before. Richard E. Grant won for supporting male in Can You Ever Forgive Me? And he made this wonderful homage to Ian Charleson.
You should Google it. Ian Charleson died of AIDS. Remember, Ian Charleson was in Chariots of Fire, died of AIDS in the early 90s, or 1990 at the age of 40. And he said, Charleson was my inspiration for this role. He said, this movie, more than anything, is an homage to that generation of men wiped out by that disease. It was quite moving.
It really was.
He got very choked up even talking about it.
And he is not gay.
He is not gay. He played a gay man in this, and he did a fantastic job. And
If Beale Street Could Talk won Best Movie, Best Director, Best Supporting Actress, and they all said I guess I hadn't really focused on the fact that this is the first Baldwin book ever filmed.
That's almost hard.
Shocking.
He
but,
wrote a play
so
that I saw in London, but interesting.
Queer Eye will be back on Netflix March 15th.
And
Mapplethorpe.
Will and Grace has been renewed, according to our sources.
Okay.
Mapplethorpe, the movie, is opening. Matt Smith, you know him from Doctor Who and playing Prince Philip on The Crown. He takes on the role of the bad boy of photographic art. He is interesting to watch. It's a very nasty character. He also plays him as really rather vulnerable in what is many ways a conventional biopic, but the art remains very provocative and it features a large role in the play. The story, I would say, is a little less so, but if you don't know his story, it will certainly fill you in about it. It's very hard to understand how this out there character, right, was so reticent to come out to his parents in Floral Park, et cetera.
I can imagine that, but
he was so.
It's very hard for me to imagine Matt Smith as Mapplethorpe.
He's the highlight of the movie.
Yeah.
For sure, yes.
Okay. And Chris Cooper, who I thanked for sitting in for me here a couple of weeks ago, recommends Star Trek Discovery as one of the gayest things on television, with Wilson Cruz and Anthony Rapp as a couple, and Tig Notaro playing a tart-tongued kick-ass engineer.
And I will remind you again that Broadway Backwards for Broadway Cares and the Community Center is on March 11th at 8 o'clock at the New Amsterdam Theater. Go to BroadwayCares.org.
And thank you for joining us. We will see you next week.